So when you think about human development, like a nation getting wealthier, its citizens living longer, its education expanding, what image actually comes to mind?
Right. Usually people picture something very industrial.
Exactly. I
Mm.
mean, for most of us, progress looks like construction cranes, sprawling highways, uh, massive energy grids, just factories running around the clock.
Yeah, heavy industry and concrete.
Right. But then on the flip side, when you hear about going green or reducing emissions and saving the planet, the mental image totally shifts.
It does. It becomes much more pastoral.
Yeah, we picture scaling back, right?
Yeah.
Consuming less, maybe even sacrificing some modern comforts. So I want to pose a question directly to you listening right now. Do you think human development and environmental sustainability are locked in a zero-sum game?
Yeah, I mean, it is arguably the defining dilemma of modern governance.
Welcome back to another deep dive, by the way.
Glad to be here. And, the prevailing assumption across global policy has long been that you basically have to choose a priority.
You can't have both.
Right. You either prioritize the rapid elevation of your citizens' living standards or you prioritize the ecosystem.
And you've likely felt that tension in the news you read every day. Like, if a developing country wants to build state-of-the-art hospitals, modern universities, resilient infrastructure, the traditional narrative says they have to fire up the
They have
smokestacks.
to pay the toll in carbon emissions.
Exactly. Conversely, if a nation wants to be perfectly green, the assumption is that economic growth has to be artificially capped.
And, well, the historical data usually supports that traditional view.
Mhm.
I mean, the Industrial Revolution cemented the idea that human comfort requires environmental degradation.
Wealth and carbon have just been inextricably linked for 2 centuries.
Yes, entirely linked.
But today, we are looking at a stack of data that completely shatters that historical assumption. We've got our hands on a comprehensive report analyzing this exact balance between human development and environmental pressures.
And it's tracking global data over a really long timeline, from the year 1990 all the way to 2023.
Right. And nestled inside this massive data set is a mind-bending premise concerning the Mediterranean island nation of Malta.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
So in the 2023 Global Human Development Index, Malta ranked an impressive 24th in the world.
Which, on its own is a phenomenal achievement for a geographic footprint that small.
Definitely.
We are talking about an island nation that lacks vast natural resources, freshwater reserves, or heavy industrial capacity.
The 24th is just the starting line for today's conversation. Here's the actual hook.
Yeah, lay it out.
When the researchers took that global ranking and adjusted it to account for planetary pressures, meaning they actively penalized countries for their localized carbon emissions and their global material footprint, Malta didn't drop down the list.
Not at all.
Instead, it skyrocketed 16 places to rank 8th in the entire world.
What's fascinating here is that this completely flips the script on the zero-sum game.
It totally does.
Instead of being punished by environmental metrics, Malta is actually propelled by them.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the mechanics of this phenomenon. Like, how did this tiny nation achieve a state of extreme developmental efficiency?
Right, and more importantly, does this Malta model offer a blueprint for the rest of the world? Or is it just an isolated anomaly?
To figure that out, we're going to look at human development not just as a single score, but as a living, breathing system.
I have to break it down.
Exactly. We're going to look at 5 core dimensions from the source material. First, the baseline HDI, health, education, and income.
Then we'll look at the Gender Development Index, the GDI, to see the differences there.
Right, followed by the GII, the Gender Inequality Index, which measures the actual cost of those differences.
And then we'll adjust the whole thing for societal inequality with the IHDI.
And finally, the ultimate test, the PHDI, adjusting for environmental pressure.
But we have to start by establishing the baseline trajectory. Before we can even understand how Malta defied the environmental odds, we really must understand the speed and scale of its human development compared to the rest of the planet.
Over the last 3 decades, right? So let's pull up the broad trend from 1990 to 2023.
Okay.
The global average for human development crawled from a score of 0.608 up to 0.756.
Which is progress. I mean, hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of extreme poverty.
Global literacy rose, basic healthcare expanded, absolutely, but it is a slow, grinding climb that still leaves much of the globe in a pretty precarious state.
Now compare that to Malta's trajectory. Back in 1990, Malta was already sitting at 0.735, which was well ahead of the global average.
Right, they had a head start.
But they didn't just plateau. By 2023, they surged to an elite score of 0.924.
Wow.
Yeah, they're currently sitting 22.2% above the global average, placing them firmly in the very high human development tier.
And the shape of that curve is what really stands out to me. Like, they aren't just coasting on an early advantage from being in Europe.
No, their growth speed actually outpaces the global average. They're accelerating away from the mean.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because numbers like 0.924 can feel incredibly abstract.
Just a decimal on a page, really.
Exactly. So let's translate that into the physical reality of a human life. Let's talk about longevity.
That's always the most visceral metric.
Yeah. In 2023, a person born in Malta can expect to live 83.3 years, but the global average is just 73.4 years.
That is an entire decade of human experience.
10 whole years.
Right, 10 years of life that the average global citizen simply does not get to see.
And I want to look specifically at the demographic breakdown of that longevity, because there is a detail in the data that just stopped me in my tracks.
The gender split.
Yeah. A Maltese woman born in 2023 has a life expectancy of 85.3 years. When you compare that to the average global woman, who can expect to live 75.9 years, the Maltese woman is getting 9.4 extra years of life.
The societal implications of nearly 10 extra years of life are just profound.
How so?
Well, it completely alters the architecture of a community.
Yeah.
It changes how families are structured, how the workforce operates, and, how knowledge is transferred between generations.
I like to think of it like getting an entire bonus chapter in the Book of Life.
That's a great way to put it.
Think about what you, as an individual, can do with almost 10 extra years. I mean, that is enough time for an entirely second career.
Or time to watch your grandchildren not just be born, but actually grow up, graduate, start their own life.
Exactly. It's time for entirely new intellectual pursuits. And globally, people are missing out on that entire chapter. But in Malta, that bonus chapter is basically standard issue.
To fully utilize that bonus chapter, however, a population needs the cognitive and professional tools to actually navigate the modern world.
Right, which brings us to the human capital side of the equation.
Education. Globally, the mean years of schooling, meaning the actual time an average adult has spent sitting in a classroom, is 8.8 years.
Okay.
In Malta, the average is 12.4 years.
That is the difference between dropping out of high school and completing a foundational college education.
Exactly. And when we look at the expectations for the upcoming generation, the gap widens even further.
Yeah, the data shows the expected years of schooling for a child starting their education today in Malta is 15.9 years versus the global expectation of 13 point lot years.
But what is truly revealing here isn't just the final number, it's the historical timeline.
What do you mean?
If you look at the longitudinal data provided in the report, there is a very steep, sudden growth curve in Maltese education right around the year 2000.
Wait, a sudden spike in 2000, what was the mechanism behind that? Because you don't just accidentally add years to a national education average overnight.
No, you don't. It was the result of a deliberate structural policy shift. As Malta prepared for integration into the broader European economy, they eventually joined the EU in 2004. They recognized that their geographic reality dictated their economic strategy.
Meaning they knew they were a small rock in the ocean.
Right. Without vast natural resources, their only exportable commodity was human capital.
Oh, wow.
So they had to transition rapidly from a localized, potentially agrarian or light manufacturing base into a highly specialized, knowledge-based service economy.
So they basically had to revamp their whole system from the ground up.
Yes. They essentially had to upgrade their entire population's skill set in a single generation to compete on a global scale.
So they recognized that to survive the 21st century, they had to manufacture intellect rather than physical goods.
Precisely.
And that transition perfectly explains the third pillar of their baseline development, economic resilience, which is measured by gross national income, or GNI.
Because all that expended education and enhanced longevity translates into serious, tangible wealth.
Right. Malta's GNI per capita sits at $52,155. The global average is barely over $20,000.
Malta is operating at roughly 2.57 times the global average for income. This is the direct yield of that educational investment we just discussed.
But, the sheer volume of wealth isn't even the most fascinating part of the GNI data to me.
It's the resilience.
Yes, it's how that wealth reacts to stress. The data captures the dramatic 2020 pandemic anomaly. We all lived through it. The global economy essentially froze.
And Malta was no exception.
No. Their GNI dropped sharply, falling from over $48,000 down to roughly $42,000.
Which makes sense. As a highly integrated trade and tourism-dependent island nation, they are inherently exposed to global macroeconomic shocks.
Right, when international borders close, an island feels the impact immediately.
But look at the data for 2021.
Yeah.
They don't experience a sluggish, decade-long recovery. They exhibit a perfect, aggressive, V-shaped bounce back.
By the end of the dataset, they aren't just back to normal, they are blasting past their pre-pandemic peaks to hit that 52,155 figure.
This showcases profound economic elasticity. And the mechanism behind that elasticity ties right back to the education data.
How so?
A highly educated, digitally integrated service economy, one heavily reliant on sectors like tech, finance, specialized services, can pivot to remote work and alternative revenue streams much faster than a heavy manufacturing economy.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You don't have to rebuild physical supply chains or restart blast furnaces.
Exactly. You just need bandwidth and human capital. They rebounded with compound force because their economic engine is fundamentally agile.
So the picture we have painted so far is an island nation that is incredibly wealthy, highly educated, long-lived, and economically bulletproof compared to the global mean.
A very pretty picture.
It is. But wealth and education metrics are just averages. And while averages can easily mask deep systemic issues,
They often do.
you can't claim true human development if a massive segment of your population is locked out of the benefits.
Which requires us to look at the gender equation.
Yes.
If we want to understand the actual engine of Malta's growth, we have to examine the Gender Development Index, which measures the gap in basic achievements, and the Gender Inequality Index, which measures the active loss of potential due to societal barriers.
Let's start with the gap. The
Yeah.
GDI looks at those exact same areas we just discussed, health, education, and income, and compares the outcomes between men and women.
A perfect score of 1 means total statistical equality.
Right. And the world sits at 0.955. Malta is at 0.977. So the gap is incredibly narrow.
Very narrow.
But here is where I want to challenge the premise a bit, because the data presents a very strange dynamic.
Well, one.
In Malta, women actually have a significantly higher expected education rate than men.
Yes, they do.
The data projects women to complete 16.6 years of schooling, while men are projected at 15.3 years.
Over a full year longer in the classroom.
Right. So I have to ask, does an advantage in the classroom automatically translate to an advantage in the boardroom or the bank account? Like, if females have the definitive advantage in human capital, why are we even talking about a gender development gap?
It's a fair question.
Shouldn't the women be universally out-earning the men by now?
Yeah.
Where is the disconnect between the classroom and the bank account?
That is the critical distinction between educational attainment and economic reality. Earning a degree or even out-educating your male peers by a full year does not automatically dismantle historical power structures.
Right.
It doesn't instantly close the wage gap or eliminate the unseen barriers in corporate hierarchies. Educational parity is a prerequisite for equality, but it is not the finish line.
So you can have the smartest, most highly trained female population in the world, but if the societal infrastructure doesn't support them, that potential just sits idle.
Precisely. And that is exactly why the analysis must shift to the Gender Inequality Index, the GII.
Because this metric doesn't just measure the gap, it measures the active cost to a society when women are held back.
Yes. It looks at reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market.
The global GII average is 0.455. Malta's score is a staggeringly low, 0.111.
Ranking them 36th globally for gender equality.
And the foundation of that low score, meaning inequality, is lies in metrics that bring these abstract numbers to a really sobering, visceral reality.
The health metrics.
Yeah. We are talking about the maternal mortality rate. Globally, for every 100,000 live births, 216.1 women die.
That's a tragedy.
In Malta, that number is 2.9.
The scale of that difference requires a moment of pause. 216 preventable deaths compared to less than 3.
It's staggering.
Furthermore, if you examine adolescent birth rates, the number of births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19, the global average is 39.1. Malta is at 10.4. Wow. Safe healthcare and active reproductive management form the absolute bedrock of Malta's success in this index.
Let's explore the mechanism there. How do you get maternal mortality down to 2.9? It's not just having good doctors.
No, it implies universal access to prenatal care.
Right. And it implies that the geographic reality of a small island means no citizen is ever more than a few miles away from a state-of-the-art hospital during a critical emergency.
Exactly. It implies a comprehensive public health infrastructure that views women's safety as a fundamental right rather than a luxury.
Yeah.
You cannot build a highly developed, modern workforce if the basic biological act of reproduction remains a life-threatening, unmanaged risk for half of your citizens. Health security is the ultimate prerequisite for economic participation.
Okay, so once that bedrock of health and safety is established, and you combine it with that 16.6 years of expected education we talked about, you create this massive, untapped reservoir of human potential.
A huge reservoir.
But how does a country actually deploy that potential?
You look at social participation and the labor force.
Yeah.
And the political data point here is actually quite surprising.
Oh.
If we look at female parliament seats, Malta is at 27.8%, which is only slightly above the global average of 26.5%.
Oh, wow. So political representation isn't the magic bullet driving their economic miracle here?
No. The real story, the absolute macroeconomic engine, is labor force participation.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
This is the defining data point of modern Malta. In 1990, Malta's female labor force participation rate was a meager 19.7%.
So less than 1 in 5 women were formally engaged in the economy.
Fast forward to 2023, and that number has skyrocketed to 57.2%.
That is nearly a threefold increase, a 3x boom in the span of a single generation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this mobilization of female talent is arguably the core engine of Malta's modern economic miracle.
It has to be.
Think about the mechanics of this shift. You take half of your population, you provide them with world-class education, you secure their health and reproductive safety, and then you integrate them directly into the economic machine.
It's like a complex engine. The education and the healthcare are the mechanical upgrades, but the labor force participation is the fuel.
That's a great analogy.
I mean, you can build the greatest engine in the world, but if you leave half the fuel in the tank, you aren't going anywhere.
Exactly.
That V-shaped recovery we saw earlier during the 2020 pandemic, you simply do not get that kind of macroeconomic elasticity with half your most educated workers sitting on the sidelines.
A transformation of that magnitude, from 19% to 57% participation, requires massive structural changes.
Like what?
Well, it implies shifts in cultural norms regarding gender roles, the development of childcare infrastructure, and the expansion of a service economy where physical strength, which historically dominated agricultural or heavy industrial labor, is no longer the primary barrier to entry.
That makes total sense. So we've established that Malta is rich, highly educated, long-lived, and making massive strides in deploying its female workforce.
A real success story.
But I want to pull the thread on the concept of averages again, because an average simply takes the total wealth and divides it by the total people.
True.
It doesn't tell us how that wealth is actually experienced on the streets of Valletas. What happens when we peek behind the curtain to see how these benefits are actually distributed across the population?
That is the exact purpose of the inequality-adjusted HDI, or the IHDI.
Okay, break that down for us.
It is designed to expose the gap between a nation's potential development and its actual lived reality. It forces us to ask who pays for progress and who actually gets to enjoy it.
For you listening, the easiest way to understand the IHDI is to think of it as a mandatory tax levied against a country's raw development score.
A tax on inequality.
Right. If a country has high inequality, meaning a small handful of billionaires control the resources, while a vast underclass struggles with poverty, it loses a massive percentage of its development score.
And the global average loses nearly a quarter of its development progress due to inequality.
To be exact, 22% of global human development is just wiped out by unequal distribution, dropping the global score down to 0.590.
It really represents the systemic failure to deliver the benefits of human progress to the average citizen.
Let me give you an analogy to visualize this. Think of a country's raw HDI score as the total volume of clean water flowing into a municipal plumbing system.
Okay, I like this.
Inequality represents the leaks, the rusted joints, the broken pipes in that system. Globally, almost a quarter of the water leaks out into the dirt before it ever reaches a kitchen tap.
It's wasted potential.
Completely. But in Malta, the plumbing is highly efficient. Their score only drops by 8.8%.
While 8.8% is a remarkably low loss compared to the global average,
Right.
as analysts, we have to find out exactly where that 8.8% is leaking from.
Right, pinpointing the weeks.
And the data rigorously breaks down this loss by dimension. Education inequality in Malta causes a mere 5.2% loss to the score. Health inequality causes exactly the same, a 5.2% loss.
Let's explore why those specific numbers are so low. I mean, a 5% loss is basically statistical friction. It proves their systems are highly inclusive.
They are.
When you have a massive state-funded public health system and a robust public education system, those resources act as public goods. Everyone, regardless of their background, gets a relatively equal share of the benefits. You can't hoard public education the way you hoard cash.
But this raises an important question. If health and education are only leaking 5%, where's the rest of the 8.8% average loss coming from?
Where's the big leak?
The Achilles heel of the Maltese system is income. Income inequality accounts for a 15.5% loss in Malta's score.
15.5%. So even in a highly developed European welfare state, with universal healthcare and free education up to the university level, wealth distribution remains the stickiest, most frustrating problem to solve.
It does, both here and globally.
What does a 15.5% loss in income inequality actually look like in reality?
Well, we have to look at this objectively as an economic mechanism. Capital, by its very nature, tends to concentrate.
Right.
Even when a state perfectly equalizes education and health, the financial rewards of a booming, high-tech, service-based economy do not distribute themselves evenly across the population.
Right, because you have specialized sectors. You have the tech workers, the finance executives, the iGaming industry pulling in massive international salaries.
Okay.
They are capturing a disproportionate amount of that 52,000 per capita GNI. And when they do, they start buying up real estate, driving up the cost of living. Meanwhile, the local service workers, the hospitality staff, the people running the day-to-day infrastructure of the island see their wages stagnate relative to the cost of living.
You've hit the nail on the head. You can legislate universal health care, and you can mandate equal access to schools, but you cannot easily legislate universal salaries in a free market global economy.
It's just a structural reality.
The data isn't making a moral judgment. It is simply highlighting the economic reality that income disparity requires constant, vigilant policy intervention, even in highly successful nations.
It's a fascinating reality check. You can fix the schools, you can fix the hospitals, but fixing the bank accounts is a whole different level of macroeconomic complexity.
It absolutely is.
Which brings us, finally, to the climax of this deep dive. The answer to the hook we promised at the very beginning.
Yes. We have established Malta as a highly developed, highly educated, relatively equal society.
Right.
And now we must introduce the final dimension, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index, or the PHDI.
This is where we hand them the bill. We calculate the environmental damage required to achieve this amazing lifestyle. Let me set the stage. When the researchers apply the PHDI, the global average development score drops by about 10%. The world essentially takes a 10% penalty for its carbon emissions and its material footprint.
A planetary tax, essentially.
Right. But Malta, surprisingly, takes a bigger hit. Malta actually loses 13.5% of its raw score.
The environmental tax levied against Malta's lifestyle is objectively higher than the global average penalty.
Wait, hold on. I need to push back here on behalf of anyone listening who is doing the math in their head right now.
Let's hear it.
If Malta loses 13.5% of its score, and the rest of the world only loses 10%, how on earth did Malta jump 16 places up the global leaderboard to become number 8 in the world?
It sounds like a paradox.
It is a mathematical paradox. If you get penalized more than the average, you should fall behind, not surge ahead.
It sounds counterintuitive until you look at the specific mechanics of relative performance among the global elite.
Okay, explain that.
The Human Development Leaderboard is extremely top-heavy. We are talking about the Nordic countries, North America, parts of Western Europe.
Right, the usual suspects.
You have to look at the geopolitical and infrastructural reality of those top-tier nations. Many of them built their immense wealth on massive, heavy industry carbon footprints.
Sprawling, fossil fuel-dependent transportation networks.
High-intensity heating grids, massive manufacturing sectors.
I see the mechanism now. When the planetary tax is applied, those specific giants fall incredibly hard.
They don't just lose the 10% global average. Some of the highest developed nations take catastrophic penalties to their scores because their wealth is inextricably linked to massive localized environmental degradation.
They go into absolute free fall down the ranks.
Yes, they plummet.
And Malta.
Malta survives the purge because of its exceptionally low domestic carbon intensity. Let's look at the actual data.
Okay.
Malta's per capita CO2 emissions are only 3.4 tons. The global average is 4.5 tons.
Wow, so they are well below average.
And when you compare Malta's 3.4 tons to other highly developed Western nations, it is remarkably low.
Why is it so low?
Because of the economic transition we discussed earlier. They don't have massive steel mills. They don't have sprawling multi-state highway systems requiring millions of gallons of daily fuel consumption.
Right, they are a compact, service-driven economy.
Precisely. So Malta's incredibly high baseline human development combined with very low domestic carbon emissions acts as a parachute. While the heavy industry nations free fall past them in the rankings, Malta gently drifts into the number 8 spot.
Wow. So it's not necessarily that Malta is a utopian green paradise. It's that they managed to achieve elite development without the localized carbon exhaust pipe that usually accompanies that level of wealth.
That's a great way to summarize it.
But looking at the data, I have to point out the dark spot here.
The material footprint.
Yes, the material footprint paradox. We cannot ignore it. It is the elephant in the room.
It is the crucial caveat to this entire model. It is the exact reason they took that 13.5% penalty.
Right. While Malta's localized CO2 emissions are impressively low at 3.4 tons, their material footprint tells a completely different story.
For those unaware, the material footprint measures the total volume of raw materials extracted globally to meet a country's domestic consumption demand.
So like everything they import to sustain their lifestyle?
Exactly. Every single package, every imported car, all their food. And Malta's material footprint is a whopping 20.5 tons per capita.
20.5 tons, and the global average is only 12.7 tons.
That is a staggering disparity. They're consuming nearly double the global average of physical resources.
Think about it this way. Imagine you have a very wealthy neighbor.
Okay.
Their house is incredible. The lawn is perfectly manicured. They don't use harmful chemical pesticides. The roof is entirely covered in state-of-the-art solar panels, and they drive a silent electric car.
Sounds very eco-friendly.
Right. From the street, they look like the ultimate eco-warrior. But every single day, diesel delivery trucks pull up to their house, dropping off hundreds of plastic-wrapped packages. Fast fashion from overseas, imported exotic foods, the latest electronics containing rare earth metals.
They aren't polluting locally. Their immediate environment is pristine. But their consumption footprint casts a very long, very heavy, and very dirty shadow across the rest of the globe.
Exactly. And the mechanism here is entirely geographic. Malta is a small rock in the Mediterranean. They lack vast domestic natural resources.
They don't mine iron. They don't drill for oil. They don't have massive agricultural tracts.
So to sustain their elite standard of living, they have to import almost everything. Their development is high and their local carbon is low, but they are pulling 20.5 tons of material per person from the rest of the Earth to sustain it.
Which is exactly why the planetary pressures adjusted HDI is such a vital revolutionary metric.
It refuses to let countries hide behind localized greenwashing.
Exactly. It doesn't just measure what smokes out of your local chimneys. It accounts for the planetary weight of your lifestyle.
Right. Malta's jump to 8th place is a testament to the efficiency of their service-based economy and their low-carbon output. But that 20.5-ton material footprint is the exact vulnerability that caused them to lose 13.5% of their raw score in the first place.
It's a very complicated reality.
It really is. We have covered a massive stack of data today and traced the trajectory of an entire nation over 30 years. So what is the core essence of the Malta model? Let's distill the takeaways.
If we synthesize this data, 3 distinct themes emerge regarding the mechanics of modern human development.
What's the first one?
First, the data definitively proves that the traditional zero-sum game is a myth.
High-efficiency development.
Right. It is entirely possible to achieve world-leading life expectancy, elite education, and profound wealth while keeping domestic carbon emissions strictly below the global average. You do not need a foundation of heavy, dirty industry to achieve an elite human development score in the 21st century.
And the second theme is the protective power of social infrastructure. Strong, inclusive public systems like universal maternal health and state-funded education act as a shield against the inequality tax.
They really do. By treating fundamental human needs as public goods, Malta kept their inequality development losses down to just 8.8%.
Though, as we saw with the 15.5% income gap, the free market will always try to concentrate wealth, requiring constant vigilance to ensure the working class isn't left behind.
Very true. And the third, perhaps most critical theme, is the realization that gender empowerment is not just a social justice initiative.
Right, it's a cold, hard macroeconomic necessity.
The qualitative leap in Malta's global status over the last 3 decades is inextricably linked to that threefold boon in female labor participation.
You just cannot build an economic miracle while leaving half of your human capital on the sidelines.
It's mathematically impossible.
It's a fascinating blueprint. But the report also points out that to maintain this upward trajectory, Malta faces a massive challenge.
Future action.
Yeah. They have to urgently optimize their resource utilization. They have to figure out how to lower that 20.5-ton material footprint, perhaps through aggressive circular economy practices, intense recycling, and shifting consumption habits without sacrificing the standard of living they've worked 30 years to build.
It is a delicate tightrope walk between sustaining human comfort and reducing global extraction.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with.
Yeah.
Malta proves undeniably that you can be rich, healthy, highly educated, and low carbon within your own borders.
Yet the local data is flawless.
But looking at that massive 20.5-ton material footprint, it forces us to ask a much harder question. Is it possible for any modern nation to be truly green if its high standard of living inherently relies on extracting massive amounts of physical resources from everywhere else on Earth?
A tough question.
When we look at the top of these eco-friendly leaderboards, are we actually solving the planetary pressure problem, or are we just outsourcing the environmental damage to countries that can't afford to say no?
It is the defining philosophical and economic dilemma for the next era of human development.
Something to mull over on your commute or your next walk. Thank you for joining us as we unpack the numbers, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.